All right. Uh, Listen, ji, Assalamu alaikum. My name is Shakir. Uh, Pleasure to join you. I just want to introduce you to Colleen, who's over here.
Hi, everyone.
We have a program in our marketing department. It's called Leadership Next, where someone gets the chance to shadow me for a day to understand how our business works. Colleen is my shadow today. She gets a short stick, and therefore she's sitting in with me in this call as well. What I want to do today is two things. One is just cover two elements, talk to you a little bit about my journey in my career, and then the topic that I recommended, which was heart, head, and guts, and I'll explain why that is. I'll probably do that for about 20 minutes, and then open the mic for any questions, queries that you will all have. So I hope that works. I graduated from the IBA in December '93 in marketing. Then I joined. My first job was at the Gillette company, and the reason I want to talk about the career journey was my firm belief is life is about choices, and how your life sort of eventually ends up becoming is because of the choices you make. So in my case, thankfully, a lot of choices got well made. I don't think I'm that smart to make all those choices well, but they got well made to allow me to do whatever the things that I'm doing and I'm enjoying. So Gillette at that time in '94 was a local company, and I remember when I joined that company, my mother didn't speak to me for a day because she thought I was just giving up all the hard work that she had done on me. It was the lowest paying job at that time, but the reason I joined it because I wanted to do consumer marketing. And when I met the team, I met a brilliant IBA graduate. His name was Quentin De Silva, and I thought that I would learn a lot. And it was a 3-person marketing department, very low resources. I ended up learning how to basically work very, very hard. Ended up, you know, measuring the thickness of a poster with a vernier caliper, which I still can do, or literally watching paint dry in sponsorship events because there was nobody else to do those things. About 2.5 years later, driven by a value clash, I wasn't looking for a different job or a better job. Driven by a value clash, I decided to leave Gillette. I resigned. My bosses at that time thought I was impetuous and asked me to stay. And I said, I'm going to stay as long as I'm going to find another job, which I did. And my next job was the job that I'm in, which is at Coke. I was actually rejected by Coke. So I was Coke's second choice. The first choice didn't accept. So good for me, bad for Coke, because I'm sure they would have had a better deal than if they would have gone with the first choice, or the first choice would have accepted the job. And I moved from Karachi to Lahore in a sales role, not in a marketing role. But very soon the company asked me to move into brand management, started managing brand Coca-Cola. For those of you who would recall, in the early '90s, late '80s, Pepsi was one of the strongest brands in the country. So working on Coke was not an easy task by any stretch. I was in Pakistan for about 2 years, and out of a series of different sort of evolutions, the region office got moved to Sri Lanka. And Sri Lanka at that time was strife with civil unrest. It was secure from security wise, it wasn't the safest place. And the company asked me to move to Sri Lanka. And it wasn't by any stretch a move up, from a career lens or from a place you would want to go. But I just thought that I would learn a lot in a difficult place, which turned out to be a good decision. So I moved to Sri Lanka as my first assignment outside of the country. But very soon the company realized that Sri Lanka is actually not a good place to place our talents in, especially foreigners coming into it. And they moved the office back to Pakistan. But then because of different things that was happening in the country at that time, I had a really good job, but no work to do. So I went to my boss and said, either give me something good to do, or, I will leave because I'm getting a nice salary, but I'm not learning anything. And interestingly, went to a meeting in Malaysia, and the country manager of Malaysia said, can you send someone to do a brand plan for Sprite, which is one of our brands? he called me up and said, "Can you go for two weeks to Malaysia to help on the Sprite brand planning?" So I told my mother I'm going for 2 weeks. It has been more than 26 years and I haven't been back home. Um, so I was in Malaysia for about 5 years, and this is '97 during the heart of the economic crisis. And I learned how to survive and how to build brands in economic crisis, which was a amazing and fascinating experience. Eventually started heading up marketing in Malaysia. In 2003, if you would recall, some parts of Asia were hit by by SARS. SARS had a higher mortality rate than COVID. So we had a structural change in Singapore, and they needed a marketer in Singapore. And at that time, Singapore was hard hit by SARS. So, and the country was totally shut down and nobody wanted to go to Singapore. So when they asked, I said yes. And I moved to Singapore. And I think there were 4 people on the Singapore Airline flight from KL to Malaysia, to Singapore when I went to Singapore. And I thought that what an amazing experience. This is a once in a lifetime experience that I'm going to be figuring out how to navigate through a health crisis that a country is going through, not realizing that 17 years later, we would be faced with something even bigger, and maybe that experience is going to be helpful. So I was in Singapore for about 5 years, first in marketing, and then the company asked me to move into general management. So I headed the Singapore operation, then started including Singapore and Malaysia. Just when I was enjoying, the company asked me to move to Hong Kong to head our sparkling business marketing, which is Coke, Sprite, and Fanta for all of Asia. So I moved to Hong Kong in 2009. And just when I was enjoying Hong Kong, the company asked me to move again to the Philippines to do my role for sparkling out of the Philippines, but also head marketing for Philippines. My daughter was born in Hong Kong in 2009, December, and I moved to the Philippines in February of 2010. So with a very young family in a totally new environment, and Philippines turned to be an amazing place to work, learning how to work in an emerging market. And more importantly, Filipinos are really beautiful people. So I learned a lot of appreciation for that culture. The company told me that you're going to be here for the next 5 years. So, get work on marketing, get it right and fixed, and we'll figure out the next steps. And about 20 months later, the company called me again and said, you have to move to Thailand to run marketing for ASEAN business unit, which was ASEAN is a collection of 10 countries, as you would know. So I moved to Thailand to do that. And one of the most amazing experiences over there was entering Myanmar. Myanmar is one of the few countries where Coke wasn't doing business. There are 207 countries in which the Coca-Cola company does business. And the opportunity and the chance to enter a totally new market was absolutely amazing. A market where there are no agencies, no partners, no infrastructure. How do you go to literally a new planet altogether and launch a brand and a business was, again, a very, very, very rare experience, because in today's day and age, working for, at least for the Coca-Cola company, there are only, I think, 3 markets left where we don't do any business. Again, I was supposed to be there for 5 years. And again, a call came in again 20 months later and said, can you go to China? Because we were struggling with our marketing in China. And I didn't want to go to China. We were expecting our son. I have 2 children. My son was born in March of 2013. And I said, I don't want to go to China because, I have a young family. But the company really insisted that I go because some help was needed. And China turned out to be the most amazing experience of my career because of the country that China is. As in, China was going to a university every single day. So I was there for 4.5 years. But China was the only market where I raised my hand and said, I want to do something else because I was getting too comfortable. So the company asked me to move to Atlanta, which is our corporate office. And I never wanted to do that because I always wanted to work in a market. Without realizing there's a lot to be learned in corporate offices. So reluctantly, again, I accepted and I moved to Atlanta. But at the time, we had changed the structure from marketing to something called growth. We had created a global growth function. I came in a very nebulous job, but very soon the company put me as the head of global growth operation, looking after global marketing strategy, global capability building for marketers, and global innovation, and any special projects that the chief growth officer was working on. one of the projects was the acquisition. The biggest acquisition that we made at that time was a coffee company called Costa. Costa is the largest coffee company in Europe. I believe now we have a store in Lahore and I think 2 stores in Karachi. So I was working on the acquisition. As soon as the acquisition ended, the person leading the acquisition, who is now my boss, said that you want to come and work for me in Costa. And Costa scared me because I had no retail experience. It's a very different business, and pretty much nobody advised me to go to Costa. And that's the reason why I joined Costa, because everyone was telling me not to do it. And again, an amazing experience to learn about retail business and get the hands dirty. It's an amazing thing when you go as a senior leader at Costa and they tell you, well, you can't make coffee, so if you want to work in a store, you have to take a broom and clean the floors. So I've done basically a lot of cleaning of stores in Shanghai and in London. I know how a store opens at 4 in the morning and what happens in the 4 in the morning, and that's an amazing part of learning a business hands-on. So I originally went in to run Costa as a business manager for international, expanding Costa Coffee internationally. China was a key market where we strengthened our position. We entered Japan. We reshaped India. We entered Pakistan with a partnership with Gary's and a couple of other countries. And my last stint in Costa I was the global CEO of Costa. Again, enjoying the rollout of London. And when again the company called me and they wanted me to come and serve as the Chief Marketing Officer for our business in North America. North America is our largest business unit, largest operating unit, is the mothership of the Coca-Cola company. So the chance and the opportunity to work leading marketing for a brand like Coke, which is one of the most iconic brands in the world, in a mothership market, is a tremendous honor and a privilege to do so. So that's my journey, a journey of choices. Shakespeare said that life is a tale told by an idiot, full of sound and fury signifying nothing. So 2 things are true, told by an idiot, sound and fury. But I should tell you, it's not insignificant, at least for me. I learned a lot in my journey. I've been privileged to get different experiences, living in 11 countries in the last 20 plus years, and experiencing a lot of roles and opportunities. With that, let me move on to the second part, and then we open for questions and dialogue, which I think would be more interesting than for you to hear from me. Why I took up heart, head, and gut. This is the lens that at least I take for myself and the team that I work with, the people that we recruit, to make sure that this is the lens with which we are building the culture of the team, whichever team I'm working on, in whichever role I've been in. What is heart? Heart is all about values. The number one thing that I believe in myself and for the team that we work with is the person got to have stellar values. A person who respects everyone and knows how to be respected. I always say that there is no place for brilliant jerks in the team. The person can be an outstanding professional, but if he or she is not a good human being, there's no place in the team. I use this test called the daughter test. I actually have 2 tests when I hire people. So after doing all the interviews, the final 2 tests is this. The first is the me test or the DNA test, and the second is the daughter test. The DNA test is, am I hiring a person who's better than me? So are we improving the DNA of the company? Versus, am I hiring a person who's like me, and I don't think we're going to improve the DNA of the company? A lot of people thankfully pass on this because my DNA is very easy to be improved on. The daughter test is when a lot of people fail. The daughter test is, am I hiring a person under whom I'm going to put my daughter? Not my son, my daughter. And I have to tell you, 50% of the people fail. And my simple lens is that if I'm not going to put my daughter under that person, there's no way I'm going to put Colleen under that person or anyone working in my team. So heart is priority number 1. The second is head. Head is intelligence. And intelligence is not IQ, but intelligence is the quotient to be a voracious learner. Someone who is exceptionally inquisitive, who wants to learn not only what they are doing in their respective roles, but the world outside, inquisitive about the culture, about the society, in our case, about consumers, about a customer, about a bottling partners, able to get their hands dirty, knows things 7 levels down versus at the surface. So we are looking for people. We want to have people. We have a team who who are voracious learners, and the same goes for me. I was sharing this example with Colleen this morning. I was driving with my son, who's 10 years old now, last weekend to buy some medicine. So we go to a pharmacy called CVS, which is a big pharmacy over here. I've been seeing this pharmacy for the last 7 years since I've been here in the US. And my son says, "Do you know what CVS stands for?" And I had no idea. And I said, "Well, I should know this." And what has troubled me since then is I see the CVS board because it's such a prevalent store here in the US and in Atlanta. I said, well, what else I have been blind to that I'm not learning? So I did went and find out and what does CVS stand for, and it stands for Consumer Value Store. But that notion of constant learning is critical for us. And the third thing is guts, which is how the ability to think big and bold. It takes our lenses that it takes the same amount of time to think 10x or 10%. So we don't know why humanity still thinks 10% when you can think 10x. Because if you think 10x, it expands possibilities tremendously. Even if you miss the mark by 50%, it will still be 5x and it'll be much bigger than anything you can imagine. So, how to think big, but also have the boldness in it. Which is the courage to do things that are going to materially move the needle. There's a simple sort of paradigm that we use that you can choose to play on the right-hand side of the decimal place or on the left-hand side of the decimal place. On most days, the things that I come across are on the right-hand side of the decimal place. Small things, small incremental things that do not move the needle of the business for ourselves, for our consumers, for the society. And there's no reason for that to happen. So big and bold is really, really important. As part of my exposure with Coke, one of the privileges I had was to spend 3 hours at a dinner with Neil Armstrong, the first man on the moon. I'm a space geek, so it was the dreamiest of the dream come true for me that I was able to sit next to Neil Armstrong. And one of the many questions I asked him was this, which sort of blew my mind away. Neil Armstrong got his flying license before he got his driving license. So he could fly a plane first before he got his driver's license. So I asked him, what is your biggest accomplishment? First man on the moon. Most of us look at the moon and says, tomorrow is going to be Ramadan. And he probably looked at the moon and said, well, been there, done that. Yeah. And he said, I hope my biggest accomplishment is ahead of me. And at that time, he's passed away now. At that time, I think he was 71 years old. At 71, the first man on the moon said that I hope my biggest accomplishment is ahead of me. And one of the other things I asked him was, would you ever go back into space? And he said, yes, but only if I can command my own ship. So the guy at 71 was still, had a paradigm which was much bigger than probably, somebody like me was sitting next to him and said, I can't even think on how big this person thinks. So I hope we can do that. There's a book that I'm reading these days from Henry Kissinger. It's called Leadership Studies and 6 Studies in Global Leadership. And he says that, the great leaders never end up at the end point of a linear pathway. Great leaders never end up at the end point of a linear pathway, which means great leadership never is a straight line. It is a line that goes up and down, and there is an opportunity for you to shape the line. Not all the time, because circumstances do play a role in this, but there's an opportunity for you to shape that line. And if you can do that, you should not miss that opportunity. Hence the idea of guts. So heart, head, and guts, 3 criteria personally for me and for the team that I have the privilege to work with. Let me just pause over here, stop, open the mics for your questions, queries, thoughts, so we can have a dialogue. Over to you. I see a hand from Burhan.
Hi, Assalamu alaikum. Can you hear me?
I can.
Thank you so much for your time, Shakir. I have one question, and I think this would fall under the topic that we're talking about. My question is more about, you've talked about values and you've talked about these kind of things. A lot of challenge people, like, I can talk about myself and other people as well, have is, how do we display them when we are looking to basically establish ourselves within a company? I understand that value takes time, where you deliver over a period of time, you show your values, and people recognize that you're there on time, you're doing the work that needs to be done. But say, for example, during an interview, when you're trying to get into a company like Coke or some other company where values do matter a lot, how can we convey our values or our beliefs that we are aligned with the company in a way that is, doesn't sound fake, doesn't sound as if we're making stuff up? Because sometimes that's what interviewers feel, that what we're saying is what they expect them, like, people to be saying. So I just wanted to know how you would advise someone to depict their values in a very short amount of time, so that people can actually benefit from it, like if they have those values. I'm not asking for people to fake it, but I mean, if there are certain values, how can we depict it where it can be conveyed in a proper manner? Thank you.
A good question, Baran. Listen, my take is that you cannot depict your values. You can only live your values. And the word I think you used was right, that you cannot fake it. The authenticity of values either comes out or doesn't come out because they're not there. I'll give an example. One of the things that I look at as you heard from me, right? So heart is number one. We look for people who can build great people. Great brands are built by great people. Great businesses are built by great people, not the other way around. So one of the things that I'm always at a watch out for is how many times somebody uses I versus we. And that's something, to your point, you cannot fake it, but you also cannot push yourself to do that, because the moment, if you're an I person, it will come out. You cannot fake it. If you're a good human being, just fundamentally, if you care about people, it would come out that you would, you will give credit to people, to the team who worked on it in your interview, in the discussion, the example you're quoting. If you're a hard worker, you wouldn't say, I work hard. You would say, you know what, in that particular role, or in that example, what I did was I had to go through, I had to read 5 books. I had to work through X million data bytes of data, and then we were able to figure it out. So values is something that comes out, and it is not something that you put through. I'll give you one example on this. This is a couple of years back. I was listening to an interview from Larry Page, founder of Google, and this is just when they changed the company name from Google to Alphabet. And somebody asked him how did you go through that process of changing the name of the company? And he said that, well, you know what, I read 3 books around, how nomenclature works for companies. And then, our team came in, we had a discussion. Eventually, we came with this idea of alphabets, not alphabet, but alphabets, and hence the concept. And the interviewer moved on to the next question. All I remember from that is the CEO, not the brand manager of Google, not the consultant, not the agency, the CEO of Google read 3 books on nomenclature and name change. That's values, right? As in, the guy is a voracious learner. That's his value that comes out. Bill Gates, again, as an example, if you see him traveling, he carries a bag which is filled with books, because he's a voracious reader. He never says, I read 10 books in a week, but the things that he depicts, that comes out. So my take always is that values is either you have it or not, and you cannot, as you said, you cannot fake it, and it comes out. And never, my recommendation always be, don't push it. If you have it, it'll come out, and people will recognize it if they're looking for that. If this is a paradigm, and this is the ethos that the hiring company is looking for. I see a hand from Chandan.
Thank you, Shakir. I really appreciate your time and insight. Because you moved to different countries and come across to work with different people, did you face challenge where your core values are challenged because of the mission and vision of the company, where you see, I don't agree with that, but because this is where my company's vision and mission requires me to do, and how did you overcome those kind of situations?
Listen, thankfully not, because then I wouldn't be working for this company. Honestly, as in no amount of money can buy you to compromise value. So I've been super fortunate that I work for a company that has stellar values, and its values are consistent with mine, which is very, very important. So none. But let me take that question to stretch it, right? The issue is company values are never an issue. The challenge working with different countries or being in different countries is culture. And cultural conflict comes in. And that's the one that I think is always difficult to navigate, which is respecting the culture of that country, but at the same time ensuring that we're progressing the values of that business. And I'll give you an example. My first day in Philippines, my first day. So I'm going from my home to my office, and I get there, and as I'm entering the office, the main street of that office was filled with Pepsi banners. And I said, what the hell? This is a Coke office, and the street is packed with Pepsi banners. So I go to my head of integrated marketing and said, how come the Pepsi banners? He said, well, Pepsi did this to piss us off, and we don't react to it. Now, we don't react to it. We don't have a lens. And Pepsi, is a great company. They don't do it as well, but sometimes people do things which are weird, right? So this is not the Pepsi value as well, and I know that. But at the same time, our salespeople are walking every single day over there, and they're seeing that the Coca-Cola company is not doing anything about a competitor directly attacking them. For me, that's like my neighbor throwing trash in front of my driveway, and I'm refusing not to clean it. I said, oh, that's okay. I'm going to let this trash in. Value clash, right? Culture clash, actually. So I went to my boss and said, who was a foreigner in Philippines, and said, Guillermo, what the hell? And he said, you know what? This is not a culture where you take on battles, right? You don't hit. I said, Guillermo, this is not the culture of the Philippines. No culture would say, put trash in my driveway, and you know what? I'm going to let it rot. And I'm going to do something. Are you okay with that? And he said, yes. Okay. So what I did was I called the team and I said, listen, this is what you're going to do. Find out where the Pepsi office is. And we're going to put Coke Zero banners all over. Not a Coke banner, because we're not going to acknowledge Coke with Pepsi with a Coke. We're going to put Coke Zero banners. And we're going to keep on putting them on till the time they take it off. So we did that. A week later, somebody in Pepsi, probably took the banners off at night. So I had someone who would go through that road every single day. And if he saw any banners off, we would put them back again. 3 months later, we found out that I think the CEO of Pepsi was coming to Philippines, or somebody senior. And somebody from Pepsi called us up and said, you know what, can you take these banners off? Now we had a choice to be nasty and say, you know what, you started this and we will not. So, your leadership would do. But again, this is a value thing. The idea was not to do that. We can be competitors, but we both can live our values. And I said, Pepsi is a great company and they have stellar values as well. And he said, listen, we never want to do this. Somebody in your office did this. If you're okay to take yours off, we'll take our off and we'll never put it. And if you agree to do the same. And you know what? They said, yes, absolutely, we'll do that. Since that day, nothing ever has happened in the Philippines between the two of us, because it's a mutual recognition of respect that we had to do. So I think those are the sort of skirmishes that have come in, where we have challenged each other on culture, what we assume to be culture and values and what are not, and pushing the paradigm a little bit more.
Thank you. I appreciate it.
All right. There's a question from iPhone. I don't know who the person is, so we're going to open the iPhone for the question. Hi. Yeah, go ahead, please. Sorry, you're on mute.
Yeah, hi. I hope you can hear me now.
Yes, perfectly.
Great. Great. I'm not well dressed because I'm in the gym, so I'm sorry for that. One question. I recently met you in Karachi, and you are a very humble person. Because I could observe. You can observe many things. So one thing I observed that you are an extremely humble person. So with the trajectory that you had of success, mashallah. So how you were able to maintain this humbleness? And we know for sure that हमारे यहाँ ये होता है पाकिस्तान में कि जरा सी भी कोई पोजीशन हो जाए, so we lose our ground. But it wasn't true for you, and I was really inspired. So few comments on how you have been able to keep yourself so humble.
Listen, I appreciate it. Thank you. I was very simple lens on thing, and Charles de Gaulle, who was the post-war president of France, he was asked, what is your legacy? And he said that the graveyard is filled with people with legacies. And I think that's a very telling thing, that we think we are or could be someone. When my children look at me, they just look at me as a father. They don't look at me as anything else. If I walk down the street, I don't think 99% of the people would not recognize me. And that is such as life. I normally, when I'm presenting, just to be provocative to team, I put a graveyard of my own graveyard stone on the PowerPoint presentation, which has my name, right? And I say, it will never say Shakir Moin, Chief Marketing Officer of the Coca-Cola Company. And I hope it doesn't say that, because that would be a very sad gravestone. But I hope it says Shakir Moin, loving husband, loving father, a great friend. And that's not an easy legacy to have, to be a loving father, loving husband, and a great friend, and a good son, and a good brother, and a good sister, good brother to siblings. So that's eventually the end game is this. There's a book that I would highly recommend all of you to read. It's called How Will You Measure Your Life? It was written by Clayton Christensen, he's one of the most defining authors and thought leaders on innovation. It's a book on innovation, but the core concept on that book was that how will you measure your life? And all of us would say, I will measure my life in terms of how happy I am. Am I healthy? We would never say, well, how much money in a bank account and what designation, what title, which company I'm working for. When you start measuring what you're doing in your life against those metrics, most often you'll find out that you're spending less than 10% of the time on that. So ever since I've read that book, it has even strengthened my own belief that I think the things that matter most for us at the end of the life are not the ones that you're spending time on today. And therefore, we cannot use the opportunity of today to make a difference for the longer term. So I hope I would not be remembered by which brand I launched or what was the campaign and what I did for Costa, but what a good, hopefully, fingers crossed, that I was a decent, not even a good, decent human being. I think that's a good bar for me to cross.
Shakir, we have some questions in the chat. Would you want to take those as well?
Oh, okay. I'm just seeing them. All right. Listen, let me just start from the bottom, maybe, or let me go up and see, just to be respectful to people. How did you overcome fear while taking up these geographical transitions? Honestly, I'm not a very bold person. I have to tell you, I'm an introvert by personality. I think I wasn't either driven or put off by fear, but my driving factor was learning. And that just overcome everything that came in my way. Like, hence nothing made me afraid, because as I said, that I don't watch horror movies. I get afraid very quickly. So I am not a super bold person, but the idea that I'm going to learn a lot more in the things that I was doing has driven me. Number one, in the early part of my career. In the later part of my career, I realized that the more tougher the assignment, the more I will learn. Hence, it was just a natural thing that I would just jump into this and do this. So it wasn't as much fear as the notion of learning. What advice would you give yourself if you can go back to your early years of career? Yes, I'm very clear on this. There's advice that I would hope that I would give myself if I was to go back. I love marketing. That's how I started my career as, and I navigated, as you can, as I shared with you, in sales, general management, marketing, strategy. But in the early part of my career, I was very maniacal about marketing. I loved it. And I think for the first decade, I missed the opportunity to do different things. If I was to go back in time, I would push myself to get assignment in supply chain, in finance, in sales management, in IT, in HR, and learn things cross-functionally versus becoming an expert in marketing. Thankfully, I got that realization later on, so I pushed myself to do that with the assignments that I could take on. But I wish I would have done that a lot earlier for hopefully a much deeper sense on the value that I can bring to the businesses that I've been working on. Question 3 is, what drives you to take new challenges? At times you become so comfortable on how things have been around us. We find it difficult to opt for difficult and challenging roads. How do you keep that spark alive and not let your surroundings affect in a negative way? Well, I have to tell you one thing is the driving force of the Coca-Cola company. The moment before I get bored, they decide to move me out, which has been helpful. But the other thing is that because of my own sort of hunger for learning, learning is a drug for me. It just keeps me very impatient about the world outside and what we can do better. And I think that's the one thing that, I'm always living in my uncomfort zone versus my comfort zone. And if I'm coming close to it, the alarm bells ring. And the last time that alarm bell rang was in China. I can live in China for 100 years. I will still not understand China. China is so rich in its culture and its history. But there was a sense of comfort that I was getting because of the momentum we had in our business in China. But I was worried that I'm going to get lazy. And that worry sort of pulled me out, and I moved into something totally different and equally challenging. But I think eventually it has been that, which is just learning from outside in, because it makes you realize how much you don't know, and therefore how much you got to work hard to learn and do something better or different with your life. What was the most challenging country faced? I think in my career, China was a challenge because of the quantum of learning that I had to go through at a very short period of time to make a material difference in the business. China is a very visible market for every business worldwide. Obviously, it's big for us as a Coca-Cola company. So there's an expectation that you go into that role and you're going to make a material difference in the trajectory. But you are trying to learn 5,000 years of history, social norms, cultural norms, how brands grow, what has happened, and trying to condense this in 5 weeks, 5 months. I think that was challenging. The other one was entry into Myanmar was infinitely exciting and challenging, because going in a market where you don't know who consumers are, what do they drink, what do they eat, there's no research available, there's nobody there to advise you on how to do this, was a fascinating challenge. How does your day look like? How do you balance work, family, and setup? So, Colleen is here with me. We were looking at my schedule today because she's sort of going through the day with me. First of all, the week is important because the week is usually a lot of travel. I go in and meet our customers, our bottling partners, sometimes stakeholders. So at least this is a rare week that I'm in the office for the entire week. Next week I have an industry meeting, a bottler meeting, and a customer meeting in 3 different cities. So I'm out. In the days when I'm in office, priority number 1 is there's always something on an agenda regarding people. Number 2 is anything that is focused on short-term deliverables. So our plans for, let's say, Q4, Q1. So we're moving the needle on execution. And third is strategy, right? In the mid or short-term strategy projects where we are shaping any strategic issue with our portfolio, our brand, how we are reaching to consumers. So 3, I normally look at the calendar and say, well, am I covering these 3 on most days? Some days, we have a full day strategy session, so that goes out. But on most days, is it a good balance on people first execution second, strategy third. Question, everyone learned from the mistakes. What silly mistakes you made early in taking decisions? Many silly mistakes, and I can write a book on that. But I can tell you a silly mindset. When I was growing up in the company and in my career, I wanted to be the CEO of the Coca-Cola company, because I thought that was not the ultimate career ladder, but the ultimate mark of success. And I had a chance to meet, for the first time, the CEO of the company was in 2002 in Chiang Mai, which is a city in Thailand. And there were 10 of us who were sitting with him. It was like a meet and greet the CEO. And at the end of the session, he asked, so when you grow up, what do you want to be? And I was the only one in that session who said, I looked at him and I said, I want your job. And he started laughing. He did exactly what he did. He started laughing. And I think that was not the silly mistake. It was the stupidest thing to think, because life is not about whether you want to become a CMO or the CEO of the Coca-Cola company. Life is about the values you got to live. So thankfully, something changed. I don't know what triggered that change. Maybe it was a Neil Armstrong meeting. When I stopped looking at that. So when the companies ask me, what do you want to do next? I say, I don't know and I don't care. The only thing I want to do is do my current job really, really well. And if I do that, I'm good with that. And if that's the last thing I'm going to do, I'm perfectly fine with that. So I have no sort of ask on what the next thing is going to be. Let me see if I can move this down. There's another question. What advice you have for a recent graduate trying to navigate the field of marketing? How does one deal with the overwhelm? Listen, advice would be that what happened during COVID in 18 months historically would have taken 15 years. So when you look at the change, especially in the space of digital adoption of digital and social, 15 years of shift happened in 18 months. So the pace of change has gone up radically. And therefore, if you're starting a new career, you got to understand, or just starting new in marketing, you got to understand that you got to keep pace with the quantum of change that is happening. I don't think we are growing that fast in our brains, but the market is, and the consumers are, and the society is. And you got to figure out how to be ahead of the curve on this. And the way you deal with the overwhelm is to embrace it with two things. One is hard work. There's no equivalent to hard work. In my early days, I used to work for 48 hours straight. I've slept in offices. I've done all sorts of things, because there's no substitute for hard work when you're trying to learn. But equally, I think what is also important is to deselect. Make choices on things that you want to focus on and things that you don't want to focus on. This remains part of my weakness, which is I want to do a lot of things, so I struggle with prioritization, and I force myself now to select things in my hand. If it's more than 5, I realize that I'm not prioritizing hard enough. How have you handled setbacks in your career? Easy, faith. I believe that there's a God, and nobody can mess up with my life except for the higher being. And isn't that absolutely unshakable belief that whatever happens, happens for a reason. The things that you control, that you should work on, and things that are not controllable, you don't worry about it, and don't think anybody else has the right to manage your career or can influence you. How has your family reacted to geographic changes? Well, I'm thankfully married only to one person, and he has not decided to leave me yet. But it's the first half of my career. We got married when I was in Singapore. We had children when first child in Hong Kong, then in Thailand. Our children were very young till the time we were in China. So I think it was easier, to be honest, moving with young children. Not easy, but easier. It's very tough, especially for the spouse, to change countries that much, and to go to countries where you don't have anyone. You don't have anyone to call and find out how things are. In some cases, you don't get the right food. We have certain restrictions regarding religion on the type of food we eat. We can't get it, so it's difficult. Now, when the children are growing up, I think my last role was out of London, and the children said that they don't want to go to London. So I decided to keep them here in Atlanta, and I was traveling almost every week between London and Atlanta. I think this is the last question that's coming up. In today's health conscious era, where people are realizing soft drinks are not good for health, how do you handle this challenge from ethical marketing perspective? Listen, very simple. I'm drinking one of our beverages. I would not work for a cigarette company, no matter how much money they're going to give me or whatever they're going to offer me. And I would not work for an alcoholic company for the same, no matter what the money is, whatever the role is, because I don't consume those products and I don't believe in those products. Number one. Number two is, minus obviously exceptions, right? If I can't give these products to my children, I would not do that work. Because if I, same thing, daughter test, if I can't give them to my children, why would I give it to anyone else? My children drink all of our products. For soft drinks especially, what is important is ensuring that you are rightful about consumption. If someone is drinking 10 cans of Coke a day, it's like if someone is eating 10 chocolate bars a day, that's a problem, man. Somebody's addicted. And I think they're going to hurt themselves a lot. But I don't know the secret formula of Coke, but I know enough to know that these products are really good, as in they are made with the best ingredients possible. There's nothing harmful, and I give them to my own children. I cannot give you any better testament. And I hope that you would have found out by now that my children are very important to me, number one. Number two is, outside that, the Coca-Cola company, for example, here in the US, we have a wonderful milk business, a brand called Fairlife. We have a huge juice business with brands like Minute Maid and Fairlife. We have a wonderful water business. So as a part of the portfolio as well, so because this morning when my son was having breakfast, he didn't have a Coke, he had a Fairlife milk. They normally are allowed a little bit more relaxing weekend, so they have a Coke over the weekend. When we're outside and we're having lunch, they're allowed to have a Coke as well. So we ensure that the children get a balanced perspective on meals. So that's my personal point of view on a lens. The other thing that we are very, very, very careful as a company is we don't influence young minds. So we don't market to children under 30 years old or 13 years old, so anyone, because those are formative years. And those decisions should be taken by parents, not by us, not by brands. So from an ethics perspective, that's a line we don't cross. We don't influence people whose minds are still being formed. I know we're coming to the end of time. There are two more questions. What advice would you offer young professionals in Pakistan? Same as probably anywhere else in the world, which is, listen, work hard, be massively inquisitive about whatever you are learning. At the end of the game, I think those two values trump everything else: hard work and inquisitiveness, because that's going to propel your career to, or whatever you're seeking, in hopefully interesting ways. How's Coke positioned against Pepsi globally, especially after Indonesia's transformation of Pepsi? This is a very broad question. I think Coke has a very well-defined positioning. Pepsi has a very well-defined positioning in how they work. Thankfully, we win in most countries based on sheer performance and brand love and scores that we get worldwide. But Pepsi is it's a very admirable business in terms of how they build their business internationally and globally. But these are brands which have two distinct positioning, and they both play in their respective lanes. Do you think one can restart career at the age of 40? Oh, hell yeah, absolutely. I think you can start your career at 60 if you needed to. If you look at, people who have made shifts, as in the most visible example known in the recent history is Steve Jobs. Steve Jobs' transition to what he made Apple didn't didn't come in when he was 20 years old. At 20, he started something radically interesting and different, but the Apple company that he built started happening towards the late 30s, early 40s. And there are many, many examples where the penny dropped at, actually, interestingly, at 40 versus at 30. So yes, I think you can have a totally fresh start at 40, and there are many examples who have done it really, really well. Suggest us a list of books to read, especially coming from your library. Well, you would need we would need a lot more time on this to go through. I can tell you what I'm reading recently. I mentioned Leadership by Henry Kissinger. It's a fascinating book on leaders who have transformed their countries. And my lens is that these leaders have transformed countries with values. And I think that was an important lesson out of this. So he talks about Konrad Adenauer, who was a leader for Germany after Second World War, Charles de Gaulle, Lee Kuan Yew, a leader, the founder of Singapore, a leader that I deeply admire, Margaret Thatcher, and I'm missing two. I've so far covered Adenauer and Charles de Gaulle, and I'll learn about that. But it's a fascinating perspective on leadership and what's happening with the world today. He has, Kissinger is 99 years old, and the way he writes says and put people like me to shame. So, well, he can think like that at 99. I can't even think like this now, or 10 years back when I was much younger. Should youth consider leaving the country? Listen, I don't know. I know that things are tough in the country. And things do look gloomy, but countries do go through ebbs and flows. There's not a single country that you find that always would have a single trajectory. They've got to have belief that things are gonna become better. Countries do depend on you to make a material difference to it. I have to tell you, because you can say, well, that's not very clear because you left the country. I never wanted to leave the country. That was not my ambition. That was not my dream that I would work someday outside the country. I just wanted to be where learning was. And at the time, where I was at the Coca-Cola company, because I was part of the company, then the country, I wasn't getting the learning at Coca-Cola in Pakistan. And so I'd asked my boss, I'm going to leave the job, not to go outside, but I have to leave the job because I'm not learning here. So I might as well get something else to do. And thankfully, he found something for me where I could learn a lot more, and that took me on. Why is it a commonplace for restaurants to only offer either Pepsi or Coke? Do you think it's unfair practice trying to monopolize this channel and not allowing the level playing field for the competing brand while providing choice to the end consumer? Listen, it's not a mandate by a company. Coke doesn't go and say, if you sell Coke, you cannot sell Pepsi. That doesn't happen majority of the time. I can tell you that. I'm sure some weird things happen somewhere, but not majority of the time. What happens is that for most of our customers, it is easier to deal with one partner, because you're managing supply chain, you're managing invoicing, you're managing relationships. Now imagine, I'm going to give you a very visible example. If you put a fountain machine which has 6 valves and it has products from company A and company B, let's say Coke and Pepsi for that matter, and if there is a quality issue on the valve, you don't know where the issue is. So who do you call? You call Coke or Pepsi? And do both these technicians come in, and how do you manage it? So the answer is not on exclusivity between one versus the other. The answer is, I think, on most cases, just simplicity to do so. Eventually, the consumer vote is the most important vote to win. And if the consumers are saying, you know what, I don't want that drink, no amount of money would get the customer, in this case, the restaurant, for example, to put that brand in. So, the days of monopoly are long gone. It's level playing field everywhere. And the biggest level playing field is e-commerce. I can go and buy any product I want. And therefore, the strength of the brand is more important than contract. So I can tell you that it is not monopoly at all. It is now, what the preference of the consumers is. Seems like you were lucky to have good organization with good bosses. Oh, absolutely, absolutely. Lucky to have a good organization with good values. But I have to say that I was super fortunate to have really, really great bosses. Um, because there's a context of IB, I was lucky to have bosses out of IB as well. I mentioned my first boss, Quentin De Silva, who was, I think, from class of 90, of 80, 97, 87. Uh, Incredibly talented person. I learned so much from him. I had a semi in the sense I never reported to him directly, but I learned so much from him, which was Sabir Sami. Sabir is now the CEO of KFC, and a person who, at least for me, delivers perfectly on the definition of hard, heads, and guts. So yes, super lucky to have the best bosses. You express life is more about the choices you make. Don't you think these organization bosses choose you instead and enable you to become who you are today? Not really, not really. I think you always have a choice. I always had a choice to say no to the things that came my way. I had a choice to change the career trajectory on what I want to do. I told you I raised my hand to go to go to Atlanta. You know, that was not something that the company actually wanted me to do. The company wanted me to stay in China, and I was just worried, as I told you, that I'll get lazy over here. The company did ask me to move to or offered me to move to Costa, but I had a perfectly good reason to stay back and not take that role. Because I had been in my role for about a year plus when the opportunity came in. So, you know, it's we always have a choice. How to get a dream world in such a competitive world? Don't know. You know, you continue to work hard and continue to look for opportunities. Dream is a very interesting word, right? And what we think is a dream may end up turning to be a nightmare. I think just being open to opportunities that come your way could be interesting. For a teenager, say 16 to 17 years old, is it better to focus entirely on academics and college and ace that, or some practical experience in the startups as well? Uh, there's an article I think that came this week in Wall Street Journal. So if you get a chance to read it, it was talking about how, at least in the US, the youth are putting less premium on education. And sadly, the crux of the article was that the value that you're getting out of the monetization of value out of education is coming down. So you're not getting the money from your jobs to pay the loans that students here in the US take. I thought that was a very wrong paradigm. I think the idea of education should be lifelong learning. And you need a good base at the beginning to get you to think how to become a learner. That's why I think going to good academic institution is fantastic and it's important. To that point, I think that question on what would you advise yourself earlier on, I think one of the advice I would go give myself is to work on a startup. I would recommend that. I had that chance in the Costa role. Our international business was a startup. We literally designed it as a startup. We called ourselves the Pirates versus the Navy, which was the main Costa organization. And because it made us think very differently. And I was lucky enough to now take those learnings and apply it in my current role. Uh, how do you evolve and innovate on a product level in a company like Coke, where you already have a standard established product? Does it get boring and run-tail? Oh, hell no, absolutely not. And Colleen is here and she can talk to you more about this. We have a robust innovation pipeline. In fact, one of the meetings today here is on looking at the innovation pipeline on Fanta that we are putting for 2024, 2025. So even on Coke, there's constant innovation happening on packages. You know, how do you bring new packages, new ideas in the product, new ways of marketing? The other thing is innovation is not only product. Innovation is also what happens around the product. There's tremendous amount of innovation that is happening on how we connect with consumers. How do we take these products to our customers and to our partners? So boring is not really the word that I always use. These days, people are trying towards getting into Amazon market and learn skills where they are. What are your views on it? Listen, yes, I think it's a great learning opportunity, but that's part of, you know, many things that you can learn. As in, from a pure consumer lens, our consumers shop at Amazon, but they also shop at Walmart. They also shop at Kroger. They also go and have a Coke at McDonald's or a juice at, Burger King. So learning Amazon, at least from my vantage point, is one of the things. Unless you have a passion for the e-commerce business or B2C business or B2B business, incredibly different world than a brick and mortar business. So yes. Something how to retain good talent. Help them grow. If they're growing, they will stay. If they're great talent, because money eventually equalizes out, and good talents or great talents know that at the end of the day they'll make the money that they're supposed to. But if they're not growing, no amount of money will hold great talents in. And if they're not growing and they're staying in, that means you don't have good talent. So I think growth is critical. What are your thoughts on personal branding? I'm not a fan of personal branding because it makes you egoist. You start thinking about how am I projecting myself. My compass is values. If you're living and having good values, I think that's who you are, and doesn't matter what the brand is.